diet today. But before I go into that, I want to read you a sentence from an editorial published in Lancet 1955. It has often been remarked that man is the only animal which eats and drinks more than enough to meet his metabolic needs. We should, keep in mind this sentence. Looking at this pyramid, you see all kinds of food, not only of the Mediterranean diet. You see that the Mediterranean diet also, means a lifestyle. The next, people get together and have a social life by eating. Next slide. And this kind of life, together with the food, has been included in the list of the intangible cultural heritage 2010. Next slide. We have to remember, next slide, that there were other countries who, applied for this, making the Mediterranean diet, and where Morocco, Spain, were not only the Italian diet. It was the lifestyle of the Mediterranean countries, Greece, for example, too. And it happened in Nairobi in November 2010. Next slide. But, the Italians, commercialized that as an Italian achievement, but it's not only. Let's say the founder, the inventor of the Mediterranean diet was Ansel Keys. He was not a medical doctor. We have to point it out. He was a biologist. He studied oceanography. And this is his phase, 1961, in Time magazine, after he published his book, Eat Well and Live Well. Next slide. The heart here may suggest that he was, a cardiologist. He was the inventor of the cardiovascular epidemiology. This is the place where he decided to move on, after when he was about 50, and he learned about the beauty of the South Italy coast. And the place where he decided to build a house with the money he made with his book. Next slide. Next one, Eric, again, next slide. And go back a second. His major co-worker was Alessandro Menotti, an Italian doctor who, sometimes moved to Minneapolis in Minnesota. And he was really a doctor. And next slide. Actually, he was born in Gardone and on the Garda Sea, and he was educated with the diet of Austria. He was born 1934, and in his parent house, they used to have Austrian education. At this time, when Ansel Keys decided to move to Italy, one of the most frequent cause of that was due to smoking, was lung cancer, but also coronary heart diseases. And it was published by English epidemiologists. Next slide. And this has been remembered 60 years later, 2016, by the pneumologists, the European pneumologists, that cigarette smoke was the most frequent cause of cancer, lung cancer, and also of coronary heart disease. Next slide. These are the countries which were included in the 7 country studies of Ansel Keys in 1958. One of these countries was Crete with a site, and Italy with 3 sites. One site was Rome, which he thought is comparable to the Minneapolis man, and 2 sites were Montegiorgio in region Marche, and Crevalcore in Emilia-Romagna. These were the two rural villages. Nicotera, which was chosen at the beginning, was not part of this study because they were told they would not be able to find out the cause of that in man in that area, which is in the region Calabria. Next slide. Oh, maybe I have to go back in a second. And one of the most important sites in this study is in the region North-Karelia. It is in Finland, southeast Finland. And this is the region which is close to the Russian border and where the Second World War actually began. Because the Russians started to, with the invasion of Finland in November 1939. And the war finished at the beginning of 1940 in southeast Finland. There were the men who had more frequently died of cardiovascular diseases, compared, of course, to the men in Montegiorgio or the man in Crevalcore or even the man in Crete. We don't speak about Japan because this is a special story. But let's go ahead. The next slide. Okay, this is the group 2004. The group of the investigators who participated to this study together with Ansel Keys, who is now here in the middle. Next slide. Next one, please. Ansel Keys, one of his major achievements was the starvation study. You know, he took 36 young men who didn't want to go into war and put them, together in a place in Minneapolis and give them 1,850 calories. This is how they looked like after 6 months. Next slide. He then studied how to rehabilitate these men, and he published that in a book, in a special book. At the time when Ansel Keys came to Europe, the result of a study of the Rockefeller Foundation was published in 1953. And this study was performed in Crete, a case study on underdeveloped area. Okay, this is the same area which 3 years later became part of the 7-country study. And as you can read here, 1 of 6 families judged the typical diet to be satisfactory. We are hungry most of the time. Okay. Wine was consumed frequently with the mid-morning, noon, and evening meals. The list of the desired foods were meat, rice, fish, pasta, butter, and cheese. These were the food which was mostly desired. Yeah, in this region where people were hungry most of the time. Next slide. Next, Eric. So this is Montegiorgio. This is a recent pictures of the rural village, one of the two, which were compared to the man in North-Karelia. And it has to be pointed out that all the persons participating in this study were men, in the age between 40 and 60. Next slide. This is not, you see Montegiorgio is not on the sea. It's in, this is a picture from the 70s, from the same village, Montegiorgio, 6,000 inhabitants. Next slide. And you see that the village is between the mountains. This is the Apennine, and the sea is about 25, 30 kilometers east. Next slide. And there is a valley, and this is the flat part of this valley. The next slide shows the river. The river, this is 2 years ago when there was a lot of rain. This is the water in the river. The next slide shows you why. Next slide is the river now, you know, having a lot of water, but because there were 3 days rain. But this water, next slide, was used to run. Next slide. This is an unpublished picture. You know, this is a family of Montegiorgio, and here this man here participated in the 7-country study. So these are 5 adults, 4 children, all in a house, together with animals which were used for the work on the field. And this is the oldest one, the grandfather. And as I mentioned, this man here, you will see this later on, is the one who was chosen to participate. This is his brother. And these are the 2 sisters. This is the wife of this one, and this is the wife of this one. Next slide. Montegiorgio, 1958. This is the area, the Picenum area, and this is the area where the ancestors, next slide, the ancestor of this population in the area, the Picena, they were the people who lived before the Roman time, between 900 and 300 before Christ. Next slide. So this, of course, also used, you know, cereals, but you see here the dishes, they were much smaller at that time. They look like more the Japanese, you know, dishes. Next slide. And as I showed the water of the river, which was used as a source of energy for driving mills. This is the rest of a mill in the area where cereals were grained, okay, to get flour. Next slide. Of course, these mills were abandoned when electricity was introduced and water was not that important anymore as a source of energy. So this is 1986 was one of the papers published 15 years after the study, the 7-country study was started. Next slide. 2,289 men of the 12,000 originally chosen in the 7 countries were that. The next slide. And Ansel Keys and co-workers found, next slide, that the cardiovascular, but here's the cardiac cause of that was much more often in Finland than in Montegiorgio and then in Crevalcore. Okay, he found that the coronary heart disease, this is CHD, coronary heart disease. Later on, we see the cardiovascular become different. Cardiovascular, also stroke, then as cause of that was included in this group. Not only coronary heart disease, was thought at the origin, you know. Next slide. So it was a little bit amplified, the field. as cause of that. So after 15 years, it was clear that the risk factors for that were age, arterial pressure, serum level of cholesterol, and cigarette smoke, body weight, and physical activity. But at that time, alcohol consumption was not included as possible risk factor. But as you saw at the beginning, alcoholic beverages were part of the diet in Creta. And the same thing, next slide, the same was the case in Montegiorgio and in Crevalcore. Okay, this is another publication from the same group, but you see here, Ansel Keys is not a co-author of this one. This has been published in 1992. It's about 463 men who died between 65 and 15 years after the 65 and 80. Okay, the age of 45 to 64, 463 men were died. Next slide. And you see here the alcohol consumption, the daily alcohol consumption among these men. I can tell you the average quantity was 84 grams of alcohol per day. Next slide. It was on Creta in the morning, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Always was alcohol part of wine, was part of the diet. You see here the comparison 65 to 91. Some parameters like, for example, body mass index in Crevalcore was 26. Yeah, and within 25 years, cholesterol 5.6, 5.8, 5.5 millimolar. And in Montegiorgio was quite similar. The body mass index was at the beginning a little bit lower, 24, then 25, and then 26. The cholesterol serum level remained constant. So you can see here the cause of that related to the amount of alcohol consumed. The man who consumed the highest quantity of alcohol had often cardiovascular disease, but also cancer and liver cirrhosis in a period where, the other cofactors like the viruses, hepatitis C, hepatitis B, were not the problem, at that time. And as I mentioned, 23 of the 463 patients had liver cirrhosis. And of those with cancer, we don't know how many of them had liver cancer. Next slide. But please do not forget, alcohol consumption was not considered and not reported at the beginning. So this is the man you saw at the beginning, at the picture I showed you of the family. This is 30 years later. It's 1987. Okay, you see the body mass index is now probably 30. And this is the other one you saw. He kept, his body mass index, but he died at 84. Next slide. The age of 84. Next slide. So this is just to remind you that the period where the 7-country study was started, in that period, there were no preservatives, no chemical preservatives. So the people had to preserve the food they earned in the summer for the winter. So these are tomatoes here, and these are olives for the winter. Next slide. But, those people in Montegiorgio, as in Crevalcore too, they also ate pork meat. You know, they killed the pork, at least one, in October, and they produce sausages and not only sausages, also lard to use instead of olive oil. Next slide. So this is the other one, the brother of the one man who participated in the 7 country studies. He recently died, and this is his wife. She's still alive and really, slim. Please, next one. And that's just to show now where North-Karelia is. This is the Soviet Union, and this is directly on the southeast border. Okay, you should also not forget that Finland was part of Russia until 1919. But the problems continued here in this area, and it ended with a war, as I mentioned before. So this is the area which has been compared with Montegiorgio and Crevalcore. Please, next slide. And crater. Here, this area here. Okay, Ansel Keys published a paper before the study was started on the situation in this area of Finland. Next slide. Okay, this is in summer, of course, in this area, in the region North-Karelia. Next slide. But in the winter, this is how it looks like in that area. You saw there is no agriculture. You cannot get, of course, salad or celery or something like that. Here you have a lot of wood. Next slide. And also the occupation of the man in this area is very different than it was in Montegiorgio and Crevalcore. In Montegiorgio and Crevalcore, as you saw, the men worked very often in agriculture, but here they were woodcutter. And they had snow 6 months in the year. Next slide. Coronary risk factors in Finland, the comparison between men and women in different decades, and the cholesterol serum level. There was not much difference in the cholesterol serum level between men and women. You see that then after the program was started to improve the quality of life of this person, also the cholesterol serum level went down. Next slide. And here you can see that what the other risk factor, which was the main risk factor, and this is smoke, cigarette smoke. You see here that at the beginning, more than 60% of the men used to smoke when the 7 country study began. And the women, smoked much less, and they remained also on that level. Next slide. Again, if you look at the paper published on the 7 country studies, there is no mention of alcoholic beverages in Finland. But Finland, alcohol abuse is a big problem in Finland, main cause of preventable deaths. So if we have to, make a reevaluation of what was the 7 country study. Next slide. Again, this is in the summer, you can make vacation there, it's very nice. Next slide. North-Karelia. This is the forest there. Next slide. The main occupation of the men, but not, of course, outside of the winter. And this is a picture from Acciaroli or Pioppi in province of Salerno. That's what, the main components of the diet. No fish, no meat. Okay, if you can make a picture, next slide. Next slide, and see maybe fish like these, but this is, not every day. This is not everyday food of the area. Next slide. And of course, there you can become also very old. And next slide. Next slide. But if you have your own, own vegetable and fruits. Next slide. Because as you saw, next slide, you're at this age, you can also go and use bicycle. Next slide, in Acciaroli. So the problem is, at the end of my talk, that the fact that we have many things available and we can buy now everything, that that we are the animals which cannot control their own hunger and appetite. Next slide. The Italian had an ancestor, Luigi Cornaro, who published in the 16th century a book on la vita sobria, the sober life. And he used to, after the age of 35, used to consume about 700 grams of food. Half of that was wine, but he became almost 100 years old. So eat less is the secret for long life. A little wine doesn't hurt too much, but this is to be controlled. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention.